Welcome to the second of our interviews with Charles Newton, talking about RSS. For you, Charles, how effective was the process of establishing an RSS feed?
Essentially, to actually get it going isn't problematic at all. Thanks to Alana's careful tuition at one of the lead teacher days. And I mean, there's some really good blogs and comments and pointers around. So actually getting it up and running, I mean, you can do it in half an hour. I've also been experimenting a wee bit with a couple of plugins just to try and make it read a bit better and things like that. But essentially, they're cosmetic. Ask me whether or not I've got it, working effectively, and that sort of gets to the heart of the matter, because it's not about how easy it is to use, it's how easy it is to use effectively.
So, how are you finding the whole experience?
Interesting challenge between the words I've written down are quality, relevance, depth, overload, and time, which I think really sums it up pretty well. And I mean, I've heard lots of other people say the same thing. What you're looking for, sorting out what is quality, stuff to follow, what's relevant, just being aware that you're not always going to get the depth that you might be looking for, and then you've got to balance that against the fact that the more you subscribe to, the more you're going to have coming in. I see at the moment I've got something like 1,000 unread things in my RSS feed. However, my advice, and I've learnt this very quickly, is there's some very handy buttons in Google Reader. One is
read.
one is unsubscribe. If it really isn't doing anything for you, or what I'm finding is that the other really good button is favorite. So I mean, you don't have to read everything at the time. If you like the look of something, whack a favorite on it. You can always go back and look at it if you want to. What I've then found is that I, have a look every now and again at some of the feeds that I'm following that I don't think are necessarily giving me what I want. If I haven't, favorited anything in there for a wee while, chances are hit the unsubscribe and finding something more relevant.
So how do you find the RSS feeds in the first place? Where do you get them from?
A range of places, mainly by when I find an article I really like, I tend to then go a little bit further. Normally it's reference you to a blog somewhere, and often I've then followed, found something else to follow or decided to follow that blog. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that, I mean, the RSS feed, you don't want to see it as a one-stop shop, because it certainly isn't that. It's just one part of a suite that I now use, and it's not the most common thing I use, but that's sort of spoiling the story a wee bit. So the other place I found lots of, who to follow was using Twitter. I mean, Twitter has given me lots of good ideas about people that I should go and look at. And quite often people on Twitter actually list a whole lot of people that are worth following. So, you have to go and have a look. So back to those, talking about those buttons, I mean, unsubscribe. And the other thing I learned pretty quickly is you don't have to read it all. If you go in there, I've got 1,000 at the moment. If I hit mark all as read and they all disappear, actually it doesn't matter, because guess what? They haven't gone away. If it's really important, it'll come up again somewhere else. Initially, I had sort of got locked into the idea that I had to read everything, but I pretty soon learned that you don't need to do that. And the other two things that I sort of would recommend people do is you need to link this to Delicious or whatever you're going to do to save your bookmarks, so that when you do see something, I've had to teach myself very quickly that if you just hit it with a favorite, don't do it for something you really want, because you'll suddenly think a month later, oh, I saw something that was really neat, and the chances of you finding it again are not good. So you've actually got to do the discipline thing of, if you really like it and you think it's important, save it as a bookmark somewhere like Delicious.
Good point.
And finally, you need to be smart about how you manage your subscriptions. A bit like Twitter's lists, which I really like. Now I've got the hang of them. You need to put your stuff into a subscription filing system so that you know which ones to read. If you have got 1,000, have a priority list. I've got a list, sort of 5 sets of subscriptions that I read before I read all the other ones.
What did you mean, Charles, by a suite of tools?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting at the moment in terms of sort of how I manage my PLN or whatever you like to call it. The main tool I actually use is Twitter. I'm finding Twitter exceptionally good for just keeping in touch with what's going on and finding connections, etc. So for my sort of casual stuff, I think Twitter's going to be what I tend to use to keep up to date with what's going on, to make connections, to keep conversations going. And then from that, often I then find links to the RSS, and I think that the RSS will be where I do my deeper reading. Where I look for, I'm going to try and find those people who are tending to comment in depth a bit more stuff, because often you see these things in both, and I think Twitter is actually pretty good at just the lighter commentary, whereas I'm going to try and develop my RSS feeds and using those that are more detailed, tending to sort of give that depth that I'm often looking for.
Our cluster goal was to encourage teachers to share their e-learning best practice, encouraging reflection and sharing. As a tool, how do you feel using Google Reader has encouraged this?
Interesting. I mean, clearly it has real potential, but it has the most potential for those who are starting to feel confident working in this space. And interestingly, to date, of all the people I'm following, not too many of them are actually from our cluster yet. We've got some people using blogs, and I like following their blogs. And I hope that they in turn are using RSS, to build up their knowledge as well. And again, I wonder actually whether the next thing we need to do is think about whether or not, in fact, a Twitter, or encouraging them to be on Twitter as well as, might, a bit like I've found that you need that broader expanse of sort of interaction. I wonder whether or not that's just another step we should put in. The other thing is that clearly lots of people do really enjoy it, because you see how much it's being used. In terms of how effective it's going to be for principals, it'll be very interesting to see at the next Principals Day, because I suspect that most of them will have tried it, but they will have found it really hard to make that sort of first long commitment you need to sort of get on top of it and get it underway and work out what does work and doesn't work. And I suspect we're going to have quite a lot more work to do trying to help them through that first stage, because they've got to do something. They can't sort of go on not being able to sort of keep a sort of finger on the pulse in terms of what's going on. I am convinced that a mixture of RSS and Twitter is probably a good way of doing it for principals, but it's a whole different mindset from how they behave now. Again, I just read an interesting comment that said that, principals often come from a mindset that they want to go to one place and read the one document that's going to encapsulate everything they need to know about this particular thing. Of course, what we now know is those documents no longer exist. People don't write those sort of documents now. And if they do, by the time they've written them, they've sort of changed their mind or whatever. So, we've got to help principals understand that we're now into a new way of accumulating and developing our own knowledge, which is actually by pulling together lots of different things that we hear and constructing our own coherence and knowledge, which is the whole new knowledge model. So there's a really big change in terms of how principals currently want to work or think they want to work, and probably how they need to work. And the really ironic thing is that I know from my own experience, and if I go into a principal's office, somewhere in there there'll be a bloody great stack of reading sitting there. It'll either be under the desk or on the desk or behind the desk or in the first cupboard you open beside the drink bottle, but it'll be there somewhere. And the reality is that principals, think that they're struggling to do their sort of the reading in their current sort of paper-based paradigm. So I think we've got plenty of work to do in terms of how we help them learn how to read in the digital paradigm.